Okay, and we are hard alive. If you could just mute your microphone real quick. So, real quick, I'm gonna mute you real quick. Okay, so welcome to this month's coffee chat. My name is Justin. I am a community member, and I also run the Monero community work group. This is one of the monthly events that we have, so I'm glad that we have you on to watch us. And also, I'm really happy that we have a lot of people on today. It seems like there's a lot of excitement around this recent hard fork, this recent network upgrade, and so it's awesome to see all of you here to watch us. So hopefully the stream is going through. If we can go through the list of everyone introducing themselves. So if you want to start with M2049R, if you want to introduce yourself real quick. Okay, thank you so much. How about going down the list, at least for me, we have Rayrar. Okay, thank you so much. Let's see, next we have Need Money 90. Awesome. This is your first coffee chat, correct? Okay. Yeah, we're glad to have you on. Okay, XMR. Yeah, thanks. Nice to have you again. XMR Scott. Yeah, if people have watched other ones, they should recognize you since you've been on all the past few. So it's great to continuously have you on. Next, Arctic Mine. Okay, so for me, your audio is maybe a little weak, but we can still hear you a little bit. So just to reiterate, Arctic Mine is he's on the core team of Monero. He's been around since the beginning, or at least since they took it over from Thankful for Today. And oh, darn it. Okay, everyone, give me a second. Desktop. Looks like, there we go. Okay, so I fixed the issue.
Start all over.
Okay, so I fixed the issue. Let me
Start all over.
Okay, so the stream is going through. Fix the issue. Sorry, everyone. So we're gonna have to go through introductions again. I'm so sorry. To everyone that's watching, we typically use a direct Jitsi live feature, but for some reason it's not quite working today. It looks like we're going to have to switch to our own hosted version of Jitsi to make it work properly. So I've kind of put together this. We're going to have to switch to our own hosting version of Jitsi to make it work properly. I put together this kind of screen capture, so it's not as good as it could be. So let's go through the list. If you can just rename yourself in chat so I recognize who you are, so you're not fellow Jitser. And if we can have M2049R reintroduce himself. Let's go through the list. If you can just rename yourself in chat so I recognize who you are, so you're not fellow Jitser.
Hi, my name is Timmy. I'm the developer of Monero. Glad to be here.
Okay, thank you so much. Then we also have Diego.
Yeah, my name is Diego. You know me as Rayrar, maybe you don't know me at all. There was a guy in Monero Markets IRC channel, didn't know who I was, so I told him to check out my mixtape. He'll know immediately after that. But no, I just do some design website stuff at Monero community stuff. So
Okay, thank you, Rare. It's always nice to have you on. Then we also have someone joining us for the first time for this coffee chat. We have Need Money 90. Can you introduce yourself real quick, please? Okay.
Yeah, hey. I'm Need Money 90. I help out with XMR Trader and various things in the community. Yeah, good to be here. And there's also an echo that's happening. Oh, wait, no, never mind. Perfect.
I think it's from Arctic Mine a little bit of an echo there. But,
and there's also an echo.
It's not as bad as it could be. But thank you so much, Need Money, for joining us today. It's good to have you on. I've seen you around for, I believe, the entire time I've been involved in Monero, so it's great to talk with you directly for once.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Yep. And then we have XMR Scott.
Yep, name's Scott, do random things around the community like presentations.
Yep, so thanks again, XMR Scott. He's been at all the past ones, so if you have watched us in the past, XMR Scott is always there. Then we have Arctic Mine. Yep, so thanks again, XMR Scott. He's been at all the past ones, so if you have watched us in the past, XMR Scott is always there. Then we have Arctic Mine.
Hi, I'm Arctic Mine. I'm a core team member, and I've been with Monero since 2014. So I kind of see the history of Monero since it's just after its birth.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much, Arctic Mine. If you would do us a favor, I apologize, but if you could do us a favor and mute yourself just because there's an echo when you're not talking, it would make things a little bit better, okay? If you would, thank you. Do us a favor, I apologize, but if you could do us a favor. And then Sarang, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, hello. I'm Sarang Noether, and I work with Monero Research Lab on some of the math and crypto stuff, and I have my fingers in a lot of pies, including this pie now.
Yeah, always glad to have you on. We've had you in some past ones. It's always great when you're on because we can always.
It's great when I have access to a laptop that's not a Chromebook.
Yes, we can always direct the more specific research questions to you, so it's not me just trying to answer some questions I don't quite understand perhaps as well as you do. So,
perfect. You can ask me questions I don't understand.
Yep, and if you're in the chat too, make sure to ask us questions. We'd be happy to go through and answer them. But most of this is pretty informal. We're going to be talking about our perceptions of Monero's network upgrade, which just happened yesterday, and a lot of other things about Monero. So whatever you want to ask about, feel free to ask, and we'll get to it if we have time. And then finally, we have Seth. If you can introduce yourself, please.
Hey. Yeah, I'm really kind of a big fan of the project. Summarized some of the last coffee chats there, and you really appreciate being invited.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Seth, so much. So I have noticed Seth was participating a lot on some of, throughout the community, and so I just invited him to come on and join us here. So thanks, everyone, for making the time here. I really appreciate it. So let's see. So we had the Monero network upgrade yesterday, and it was pretty, it was interesting because it was the first time that we had a significant, by significant I mean one party really, but we had some people that raised some contention to the hard fork, that they said we are against the ASIC change, that we're against the change of proof of work, so we're going to call ourselves Monero Original, Monero Classic, Monero Zero, even though it's the 6th version of Monero already. So that was a little interesting to see in the community for the first time that we had a little bit of a split. And it's to reiterate, I do not think, or I have no reason to believe, the vast majority of the community has split. What I think has mostly happened is one party has disagreed with the decision that the community has made and have started their own set of chains and kind of caused confusion in the process. So this is something that we'll probably have to see going forward, unfortunately, especially if Monero wants to commit to changing the proof of work every 6 months. But does anyone think that this sort of situation is really has a potential for large damages to the community, or that this is something that for the first time it's new, so everyone's a little worried about it, but in the future, as this continues happening and nothing changes and everything keeps moving on as it always has, that people will be kind of treated as white noise?
So It appears from what some people have said that a lot of these forks may be associated with ASIC miners themselves, which means that now that we basically said that we are not interested in ASIC centralization, that those people will naturally move away so that their hardware doesn't become obsolete. And if anyone knows more about what they suspect that to be, please chime in. But if that's the case, it would lead me to believe that this is more of kind of a one-time pull-away issue by folks who already own that hardware. And by committing to changing the proof of work as often as we need to, I think part of the goal was to kind of knock ASIC miners off to reduce centralization, but part of it was also to discourage future ASIC development that would lead to centralization. So I think that once we've kind of taken care of that and ripped the Band-Aid off, my hope is that will kind of put us onto a right track with the rest of the community going forward. But I'd like your other input on that too.
Yeah, I'd like to speak on this for just a bit. I think a lot of people don't understand kind of the end goal of where we want to end up with the proof of work, because the proponents of the other side that say it adds an element of centralization itself to hard fork every 6 months, they are correct, because it adds a reliance on the core team and on continued maintenance by a select group of people. So if you think of, let's say, by some miracle sometime soon, Monero becomes the global currency, right? A world reserve currency or whatever. Then that means that we've got the 7 people of the core team kind of as the leaders of the financial world, in a sense, which is very centralized. So the long-term goal is to eventually not need to do this. And I'm not talking like 10 years in the future. I don't know, 50 years, 100 years in the future. Who knows, right? The long-term goal is eventually to stop hard forking, because it does add centralization. And the only time when we can do something like this is when ASICs or they become commoditized, or however you say that word. I hope I said it correctly. Basically, everyone can have one. Everyone does have one. And at that point, it's not necessary to keep forking, because now it's an even playing field again, which is what we're trying to do with CPUs and GPUs, which mostly everybody has. We're trying to keep it as an even playing field. So everyone who thinks that we're going to just be hard forking forever, that's not ultimately the goal, because that does lead to centralization. What we're trying to do is hard fork while ASICs are concentrated in the hands of other people. And it becomes tricky, because how do you define that? Who defines that? Well, now ASICs are widespread enough that we don't have to do that anymore. So there's still a lot of human elements in here that have to be considered. But for the time being, we're committed to forking away from ASICs just because it gives an unfair advantage to a select few. But kind of long-term, thinking way down the road, we're hoping to not have to do this anymore. And I think a lot of people misunderstand that.
Yeah, the goal isn't to just say we hate ASICs. The reason that the hard fork has happened, or the proof of work change happened in this hard fork upgrade, which is planned and typical, is to say we as a community are against certain parties having significant control over the mining algorithm. And so there are people that are saying that yes, this opens up to centralization, and I totally agree with you, Diego. So I think that's a big concern going forward. However, if you just look at the status quo, we're still looking at the effects of how the hash rate are dropping, but it seems like the hash rate has dropped 75%, is like a good estimate. And so if you kind of look at that, it seems like and you can't necessarily attribute all of that to ASICs. It's hard to attribute a certain amount to ASICs, but if ASICs had around 50% of the hash power, it means the network was not especially safe to begin with, especially if they were mining in secret, essentially. So there's a lot of discussion where, yes, we've made it more centralized, we made it less safe, but Monero was in a situation where we had these ASICs by 1 or 2 parties who were secretly mining in the background, and we didn't know about it. The only time they announced that they had ASICs was after we had already announced a change. So it's definitely interesting to sort of see that. But I'm looking forward to the difficulty kind of readjusting downward, so that we can mine blocks at normal speeds now. But it definitely creates a lot of situations where people have a lot of ideas where, how can we best solve this problem? Is it something where we can say, okay, in 2 years, this is the sort of mining algorithm we're going to use, and then just give as many ASIC manufacturers as possible like this algorithm so they can build their machines, and hopefully there's a lot of competition. I don't know, and so that's something that we're going to sort of have to figure out. Does anyone else have anything they want to add about ASICs and the best sort of egalitarian proof of work you should sort of have?
The first thing
they want to add about ASICs and
for me, I had a couple things to mention. It looks like Arctic Mine is having some connectivity issues.
Is if you look at the hash rate of Monero 0.
It looks like Arctic Mine is having some connectivity issues.
I am? Okay. Let's try again. If you look at the hash rate of Monero 0, it's about somewhere around 72 to 75% of what the pre-fork hash rate was. And you can just go over to Minergate and see that. So I think that the chances that there was a single player over 51% before the fork are actually very high. I mean, that's the reality. I mean, you can look at also at Bitcoin, but there's a small increase there. But it's not, so I'm guessing somewhere around 70, 75% is pretty accurate for the drop. But
didn't we have 3 or 4 ASICs?
Almost entirely of that was ASIC. And the reason you can tell is to look at the hash rate of Monero 0.
Didn't we have 3 or 4 ASICs?
Pardon me?
Weren't there like
Monero
3?
0 is, or Monero original, whatever you want to call it, that on Minergate is basically the fork coin, the version 6. And it's generating over 800 megahertz. Pardon me?
I believe that we had 3 or 4 different manufacturers producing ASICs. So the claim that a single manufacturer would have had enough ASICs built out to actually go and have a 51% attack on the network for Monero itself, I actually think may have been slightly unlikely, even if they were approaching those amounts. Just some of the analysis that I saw for Bicol and Bitmain, etc., showed that there were enough different competitors in this space that I think a 51% attack was unlikely nearing the fork date. Showed that there were enough different competitors in this space that I think a 51% attack was unlikely nearing the fork date.
I'm not sure. I mean, what I can tell is that the ASIC component was around 75%, and that's just by looking at the hash rate of Monero 0, or Monero original, Monero C, or MC, or whatever you want to call it. So that's the ratio, and I think it's going to come in somewhere in that area. So whether it was one manufacturer or whether it was more than one, that's a different question. Or whether one actually had majority, we don't know.
Yeah, I think the best thing you really can do to estimate what proportion of the network was from ASICs is just to look at what is the current hash rate on Monero, Zero, Classic, etc. Because you have a situation where if anyone was running old mining software and didn't update their mining Monero Zero,
that's what I'm saying. In Minergate,
you have a situation where if anyone was running old mining software and didn't update their mining Monero Zero, if anyone's using.
Well, you say basically is that some of that is people that were still mining on version 6. And that's possible. But I think once the Monero hash rate reflects its reality, then the sum of the two should roughly equal the pre-fork, assuming that people actually stay mining Monero 0, which I seriously doubt, because if there's a little market for this, why would people just throw electricity at it? That's the other question. But I'm giving, I think that's not an unreasonable estimate to say about 75% or 70%, at least.
Yeah, I think it was definitely concerning, something that we definitely needed to worry about in that case, where we definitely on the network had a good number of, or at least ASICs comprise a good amount of network hash rate. And they had begun this process in secret. So I think that's just something like, if you really think about it, someone they might not have been trying to compromise the core of the network, but they at least were trying to profit off of it beyond what anyone else could have. And that's concerning because it gives them the option to further attack the network in other ways. Does anyone else have anything they want to chime in on for A6 discussions here that they want to talk about? Okay.
I thought. Oh.
Yeah, I do actually. I have one thing to say. Give me 1 second. So basically, I made a slightly controversial decision on the recent forks for XMR Trader. I made a unilateral decision as a moderator to remove mentions of any of the forks from our front page. And the decision there was because none of these forks were stemming from legitimate technical criticism. They were declared by fiat by centralized entities that said this is what is, and I don't think that we should be required to give them a platform to advertise on the place that gives them the largest exposure to people that are actually in their target audience. I think having them in discussion threads and daily discussions and stuff is fine. I'm on the fence there, but as far as top-level threads go, I think as a community, we need to decide that these forks are malicious and that we shouldn't be giving them a platform. So this is going to be a controversial discussion on whether it constitutes censorship or not, because I do not believe that this is censorship. This is moderation. So yeah, just discussion for the future.
Well, I think you made a good point, Need Money 90, and I think I read that post. You basically said because Monero has so many places of being able to talk, XMR Trader is not the only one. We've got other Reddits, we've got Taiga, we've got, GitHub itself, there's so many places for people to talk that if one person who runs one community, they're able to define the rules that community operates on. And if people don't like it, it's not like all Monero discussion ever is completely just done. Like they have other options, they have other places, and that's the cool part about being part of a decentralized community is that you're free to start up you're free to start your own little Reddit, you're free to start your own little any alternative site anywhere, and people can come. You just got to get people to come to it, and they can talk about whatever they want, and no hard feelings. No hard feelings. That's totally fine. Everyone is free to do what they want, and the people that started specific circles, they're free to do what they want with those specific circles. And the fact that one becomes more popular than another does not necessarily dictate that all of a sudden that person has to abide by what the community wants or something like that. Well, it's the one that you started, or it's the one that he or she started, so just let them do what they want and start your own. And I think people are just too used to centralized communities and centralized leadership having to do different. They're not used to being part of a decentralized community where, in open source, they say, well, if you don't like it, go ahead and fork it. That's totally fine. Just go ahead and do it. And the same thing applies to our community discussions and things like that. If you don't like the way something is being done, go do your own thing. That's fine. No hard feelings. Just do your stuff and don't whine about it. So it's a mental shift for people that they're not used to yet. That the power is in their hands to have the discussions that they want to have, and if they want to discuss, go for it in another area.
Yeah, just to, I guess, add a little bit to that. So I Need Money. I totally understand where you're coming from. I understand the pain of having to deal with that sort of discussion, and I agree with your decision to have some restrictions on giving your what is essentially a platform that you moderate, and what is a platform that you moderate, and allowing them to just use it to kind of create chaos, because that's at the end of the day what they want to do. They want to make it so there's a million Monero, etc., 3,000 different Moneros available, so that people don't know how to distinguish between each other. And I think it's definitely fair to say that if a coin is not if someone has like a legitimate concern and forks away for a legitimate reason, I think there might be some allowance for discussion, of course, but I think that if they forego a lot of the protections, if they are essentially acting as an attack on the Monero network, if they do not include any of the key image reuse mitigations, if they do not include any of these basic steps, if they don't include replay protection, then they are acting as a sort of attack, and they probably should not be given a significant voice. And so I agree that, I mean, you can't prevent them from speaking all over the place, but it doesn't mean you necessarily need to encourage it on your specific trade or platform.
And we have plenty of venues and places to talk about technical deficiencies and things people want to improve in Monero. So I think it's important to differentiate the idea of forking to a new project that is then not XMR versus talking about deficiencies and things you want to improve in XMR. And we have platforms for that. So I think it's important to differentiate between those and say that it's not like we're shutting out criticism. I mean, we're decentralized and we talk internally about things that we think could be better and things that we absolutely can't stand about the way things work currently, and that's how we improve.
Okay, cool. Does anyone else have anything they want to talk about? Or else, if not, we can introduce binary.
I was going to raise a question on this.
Okay.
Because one of the arguments again.
Cool. Does anyone else have anything they want to talk about? Or else, if not, we can introduce binary page here.
No, it's just on this on this moderation question. And I think a balance can easily be found, and it's probably going to be reached. But the question that I look at it is, sometimes the decision might be that what you want to do is literally sell the thing into oblivion, I suppose, as a way of dealing with one of these folks. And I think that's a valid discussion on its own merit, quite independent of the merit of the fork itself. So you have a situation, what about the bear? And this is kind of what I'm asking. What about those who say, okay, we're going to deal with the fork by selling it?
Yeah, so that's an interesting discussion. I believe when we had Monero V was like the first one that introduced this idea of let's fork Monero from the current location, which had not really been done before. And we had a lot of discussion there about what really to do. And it was kind of, our discussion was that we still typically wanted to discourage general use of it if they did not have the basic privacy protections in place. Now, luckily, since the 12th release came out, the software has come a long way, and the GUI now includes a way for you to blackball certain output sets where you could create your ring signature such that it's the same on both forks. And so I think that if the problem though is that most projects that are scams probably don't care. So one of two things are going to happen. So either they're going to include the privacy protections, in which case I suppose the best thing you can do is include it by default, so they have to manually remove it. So hopefully they don't know what they're doing and then they would leave it in, right? But either it's there, and then of course you can continue to sell it. But I think that if someone like really wanted to compromise the network, what they're going to do is they're going to fork off the current position, and they're going to literally remove the ring signatures feature. They're going to make it so that for transactions on that network, it will be mandatory ring size 1 so that no other decoys are used. And if that's the case, then that could be damaging to the network. Even if you plan to just sell it, you're still hurting Monero. So I think, unfortunately, it's something that kind of needs to be approached on a case-by-case basis still, until we have like a much better way of dealing with these sort of chain splits. Does anyone else have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I look forward to the day when we can do away with ring signatures and key images altogether. But, you know, the math doesn't quite exist to do that in a way that we want yet. So until then, I mean, we have to keep on working on mitigations like this as much as possible, and just being very aware of what the dangers of these forks are and how people can keep themselves safe until such time as we can just move away from this entirely and hopefully build on some technology that, you know, can allow people to do splits as they want without any kind of compromise.
Yeah, that's definitely ideal. I think that's just a shortfall we have of ring signatures, and it's something we have to deal with. Like, if someone legitimately has, or if a large portion of the community legitimately has a concern or a change they want to make, it's unfortunate for us to say, well, you can't because you have to hurt Monero if you do it. That's unfortunate, and it kind of goes against. It speaks a little bit towards giving extra centralized power to the main project, which there's still ways to fork away, and I think with the current key image mitigations that it's a lot better than when we first had this discussion in January, but there's definitely room to be had, or improvements to be made. Okay, Binary Fates, I want to take this opportunity real quick if you want to introduce yourself, because I noticed that you just joined us.
Yeah, hi folks, I'm Binary Fates. It's been around since 2014. I'm a member of the core team now, and I'm often late, so sorry about being late today. I could join. Maybe just a quick word about the discussion about moderation on the key communication platform, like the subreddit. I think in general, I see where Need Money 90 is coming from. I'm completely fine with that, and I also concur with the fact that the other projects, they explicitly want to fork from XML. They want to fork from Monero, but they don't claim to be Monero. They don't claim to have community support. They basically claim, like Monero V, that they will simply do it better. And I think it's up to them to set up their own platform of communication. I'm fine with a certain level of censorship in order to protect people from scams. I would not, give directive, or I would not have an opinion that we should necessarily apply the same policy on every communication platform. I think we should play it here a bit because there's no best practice for that. So we need to be flexible enough. But as for the subreddit, I think I concur with Need Money 90. And maybe just a quick word on what Arctic Mind said about selling the fork coins, the scam coins, just for the sake of crashing the price. I would not even give them that much importance personally. So I can just tell you what I will do personally, which is not touch them, not even for the sake of crashing the price.
Looks like that.
Binary Fate.
Yeah.
No.
We'll give him maybe a few seconds, and then hopefully you can get back online.
Unnecessary casualty.
That's unfortunate. Okay, well, when he comes back in, we can have him finish his thoughts. Yeah, he said he's lost connection to the YouTube chat, so yeah, he's definitely lost his connection there.
I think we basically heard. I mean, unless he had another avenue to go down, Binary Fate. Just in case you're wondering, we heard basically what you were getting across. I think so.
Is he back? Are you back, Binary Fate?
Hey, sorry, I lost connection. I don't know at what point you lost me.
You were just beginning your second point in relation to Arctic 9.
You wouldn't even give them the importance of selling.
I have a very bad connection. I just wanted to say that selling provides volume, and volume sustains price. So we should be careful not to give exchanges good reason to list these scams.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point too, is that so suppose the Monero community sets a precedent that when someone forks a coin, that we as a community strongly encourage people to dump it on a market. People or exchanges are likely to want to list it to take advantage of that quick, short-term, and very predictable trading volume. And so I can at least understand the economics there.
Yeah, exactly. It's free money for exchanges, and it's very little effort to set that up, technically speaking.
All right, this is just my opinion, but I think we can move on from forks and ASICs and these kinds of things. There's some other questions in the chat about other things.
Say, though,
Yeah, I'd be happy to discuss some of those.
I would like to address maybe a very short question, if that's possible.
Okay, go ahead. Looks like he's having connectivity issues too.
Everybody.
Okay. Looks like you're back. Want to address what you want to address?
Okay, yes. I've seen a couple of mentions on Reddit posts, but I haven't actually seen the issue addressed with the forks, and especially Monero Classic or Zero, that we are actually the ones forking away and should be doing replay protection and whatnot. And I haven't seen an answer to this question, if there is one. So I would like to put this in the room.
Well, I mean, technically, all of our network upgrades are us forking away from the way that we did something previously. It's just that this is the way that we've established how we're able to make improvements. So I guess I would just say this is really no different than the way we did it before from that philosophical perspective, just with the addition that one of the changes we chose to make was to reduce what we perceived to be centralization, and which we're now confirming was in fact centralization. So I think that's kind of a false argument that they're making to try to maybe discredit the way that we have been operating for those who weren't already aware of it.
Okay, is there anything else that you want to, looks like he might still be having some connectivity issues, but if he has something in response, you're welcome to discuss about that. Sorry, I don't really have too much to get. Okay, in that case, then, Diego, do you want to carry the conversation on the way you wanted to? You wanted to bring up some more questions people had in chat.
Oh yeah, sure. So first of all, I just want to give a shout out to Surrey Nother. He could not be here. He was trying to get on, but he's got a Chromebook, and Jitsi is something, and stuff like that was happening. So anyway, he plans on being here next time, I hope, but he wanted to be here. He's also part of the Monero Research Lab. And it's great that we have Sarang here to answer the questions, but are 2 PhDs better than 1? You can never really answer that question. Moving forward, we got a lot of questions in the chat about, let's move on. Let's talk about some things like, let's talk about increasing ring signatures. Let's talk about bulletproofs. Let's talk about Kavri updates. So actually, Sarang, can I ask you, you're the one that's actually most on top of this, just for everybody watching, where are we in terms of the bulletproof audits?
Sure. So as people probably know, we did a fundraising effort to basically fund 3 audits, was the community consensus, one of which was Kudelski Security, one of which was Quarks Lab, and the other of which was an independent, non-company affiliated review by the lead author on the Bulletproofs paper, Benedict Bunz. And those are all, we're basically in their queues right now. Those are companies that do a lot of different reviews and a lot of security work. So we are currently in their queues. We'll be having most of them. See, Kudelski will be starting theirs pretty shortly. I'll have a phone call with one of their lead reviewers, I think probably on Monday or a few days after that, just to kind of finalize when they're going to be starting, but they'll be ready to start presently. Quarks Lab, they'll be starting in April is when we're on their schedule. And around that same time is when Benedict said that he would also be available. So they'll be putting in probably around 15 person days into that effort, and then working up some reports that they'll present to us. Those will all be made public. We'll make any changes that we feel are necessary. And then those changes, of course, as part of the code base, will be made public. So the intent is then just to have everything be as out in the open as possible. And the way that we made the agreements is that all that information can be made public. So the way that they internally end up running their reviews is really up to them. And I will be making myself available, as well as anyone else, to give them any input that they need and answer any questions that they have But otherwise, we kind of let them do their thing. That's kind of how the audit process works. So it's very much underway, and we see no problem with getting all of that done in time for the September network upgrade, which hopefully will be much less, I don't know, perceived to be much less contentious, since bulletproofs are pretty fantastic. And once we have confidence that they've been done correctly, then I think it'll be an easy move forward to greatly shrink future transaction sizes. That's that.
Yeah, so yeah, I'm pretty sure there's not a single person here who is not excited about bulletproofs.
Yeah, I know it's something that we had really hoped to get out in March, but we kind of took a step back and realized that it's pretty new technology, and as we're kind of the ones pioneering this as part of a deployed coin. So I want to make sure it gets done correctly, and audits are part of that.
Yeah. So
right.
If anyone here is not in favor of bulletproofs, please raise your hand, because I'd love to hear any argument you have for why. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, basically transactions are going to be way smaller. We've gotten verification times to be faster. So we're not as concerned about kind of the proof formulation time, since, everyone, basically all nodes verify that all transactions are done correctly, but you only have to do the proof once per transaction. And even then, we're still seeing pretty good times on that.
Yeah, so I know there's recent research from like the Matthew Green and some of his students on how they could have better verification time and better size for transactions with ring sizes greater than 10. Do you think that with bulletproofs that it's reasonable that we can get ring sizes greater than 10 in order to take advantage of these sort of improvements, or do you still think that's several years out and most likely to even get away with ring signatures entirely before you want to?
Well, range proofs are independent of ring signatures, since ring signatures deal with doing inputs, and range proofs are done on a per output basis, and we can aggregate the output proofs together in a few different ways, such that we can make things a lot smaller and increase speeds, and the verification time can also be done in batches. So it's really what we're doing is we're taking kind of the space that we had before, and this is how much space everything takes up, and this is how much time it takes to verify. And we're greatly shrinking down the future space constraints, and we're doing a pretty good job of shrinking down the time constraints. So, I think part of the idea is saying, well, could we use some of that extra time to do improvements on increasing ring signatures? So really, that's kind of the trade-off. It's not that bulletproofs themselves let us do better ring signatures, but the thought is that they open up some space and time to do them. And again, there's arguments for whether or not we should be basically always taking that space and time that we have and filling it to the max. That's something that still needs to be discussed, as is the idea of, are there better schemes that we can use for ring signatures that let us, for example, scale logarithmically? So we're not just talking about, 7 to 9, but maybe we're talking about, 5 to 100 or 1,000, for example. And there's a big difference in those. And that's something that we're always looking into. But as of right now, bulletproofs are the first step for this.
Yeah, bulletproofs are the easy win in every single category. So if you take advantage
They are, and they also offer a lot more possibilities too. So besides just being able to do range proofs, you can do a lot of things with generalized arithmetic circuits. And that lets you do a lot of interesting verification of computations in zero knowledge. And we haven't fully, we're exploring what we can do with that, but that's in general not been fully explored. So zero knowledge proofs with a bulletproof don't scale as well as, for example, ZK snarks. So that's why everyone's not just immediately jumping on doing everything with a bulletproof. But there is still active research going on as to how we can extend that to do other things in Monero with zero knowledge.
Awesome. Yeah, we thank you guys at the Monero Research Lab. We know you're on top of reading those papers, and it's an exciting time for cryptography, because we do have things like Starks and Snarks and bulletproofs that are all, new and doing exciting stuff better and more efficiently. And so everyone watching and everyone here should be very supportive and thankful to the Monero Research Lab for all the work that they do. Thank you guys so much.
We read papers so you don't have to. I don't know. You know what? There's so many other things that you can make that sound like Stark or Snark. Someday we'll have ZK sharks, and then we'll use those.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks again, Sterling, so much for that. So just to make sure that they get a voice in, I'm going to call on Alex from local Monero. He had some great conversation last time. Welcome to the chat, Alex. Can you just very briefly introduce yourself? And if there's anything you want to get in about the previous discussion we've had, make sure to let us know. Looks like we're not getting any audio.
Man, connection issues everywhere today.
Yeah, goodness. So Alex, we're having some issues reaching you, but let us know when you. I think it's something on your local end because it looks like your connection looks okay from my end. It's just that your audio isn't going through, unfortunately. Okay, so we'll come back to you. So Scott, do you have anything you want to add or address?
Not really. I mean, my I guess, even though we're kind of going away from ASICs, my main issue with ASICs, and I don't really comment on, is just the secretive nature of it. Like, I wouldn't have as much of an issue with ASICs as kind of Ray said, if they were commoditized and it was easy for everyone to have them. But we're not even at that point, and we have manufacturing companies that are, I mean, we'll see what the scope is, but they basically kind of behind everyone's backs are using products that no one else has access to. That's just kind of my quick word for this, I guess.
Okay, yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, as you pointed out, if you have an ASIC, ideally you would monopolize it as much as possible and not tell people about it. I mean, maybe Bitmain was hoping that by keeping things secret, because if you look at the hash rate, it's pretty clear that it's highly likely that they were mining in secret for some time. That they had hoped we would continue with their cryptonet algorithm and they just wouldn't exploit it. So I can definitely see that. Seth, do you have anything that you want to talk about based off of what we talked about today, or anything else you want to ask?
Yeah, I've got like a little short list of bullet points that I can just run through real quick here. That it's one. Ricardo had a couple great kind of underappreciated tweets about the anti-ASIC your hard fork, and you're pointing out a couple of those that I think a lot of folks don't realize that just kind of the kryptonite algorithm like just isn't unlike just kind of different from a lot of other kind of ASIC considerations where they just where you're just kind of uniquely permitting ASICs with kryptonite just basically doesn't work, and you're just kind of a little bit different. Kind of like running through the bullet points here, and while it seems like into like Diego's point about eventually the goal being to permit ASICs and that kind of being ideal in the very long term, it seems kind of far off that ASICs would be commoditized and everyone would have them, but like eventually really the cost is just in the development, and over time enough people will that technology will be there for some algorithms, and then the actual cost to build each individual ASIC will be low enough that that can be fairly widespread, and people, the ASICs won't actually be that expensive, and lots of folks will have them. And then a question that I had was about the kind of the Lightning plus Tumblebit kind of enabling maximal privacy. I didn't really I just kind of wonder if there's color there, as far as kind of how that how that would work. I understand that's kind of a long-term thing as well.
Okay, Sarang, do you want me to do this? I can answer this, or do you want to take this one?
You should go ahead. I actually stepped away for a second to grab a charger, so I only caught the very tail end of that. So I could give you the tail end of an answer, but Go ahead.
Okay, so I'll start first then. This was, the question was, how could Monero potentially take advantage of Lightning and Tumblebit for potentially greater privacy than Monero offers? So Ricardo mentioned in a tweet that he had a few days or weeks ago that in order to have theoretically maximum privacy as we know right now, you would have Tumblebit and Lightning Network that settled on Monero's core chain that used CT. And so Lightning Network is beneficial because it allows people to communicate without making a direct on-chain transaction. And if you're familiar with Tumblebit, you can think of Tumblebit as like a Mixer 2.0 is kind of the best way to explain it. So you have you originally, I guess maybe 3.0. So you had your initial centralized mixing services where someone ran a website and said, send money to this and we'll send it back. And then you had the more decentralized version, yet you still had a centralized party that was chosen at random, but you had CoinJoin, which did the same sort of process, but at least created a market with Join Market for you to do that by just connecting to other peers. And then you have Tumblebit, which completely changes the way that this sort of mixing process is done, but the effect is similar. Whereas with CoinJoin, it basically takes a lot of inputs and in one transaction sends a bunch of outputs to several others. So you can still know like the value of these inputs, the amounts, which is a critical issue of Join Market, and you can still kind of see how they're associated with each other. And most importantly, though, the one server that is handling this process knows where all these outputs are going because they need to assign them. When you have CT in the mix, as you would have with Grin with CoinJoin, then that reduces the concern from an outsider perspective because you can no longer see the amounts of these outputs, which is really important. However, you still have the issue where the entity still handles where these outputs go. They still know this information. With Tumblebit, they have a different way of actually handling this data. I cannot address it in extreme detail, unfortunately, because I only know a little bit about how Tumblebit works on the technical level, but it means that in order for the server that handles this data to learn anything about what information they're handling, they need to collude with the other participants. So they would need to collude with the sender or receiver in order to learn some information about what data they're handling, and in a transaction that is at least less likely than if they just knew that information outright. And so if you send this over several tumble rounds or several tumbles, I'm not sure if that's the term they're really using in their community. If not, then I just made it. And so that way you sort of have a more off-chain record. So it's not as permanent of a record, and it's easier to use Lightning or Tumblebit without everyone in the world knowing necessarily that you did that. And then when you do want to eventually settle on the Monero core chain, you could still settle with the current advantages that we have, most notably CT, confidential transactions, so that people would not know the amounts of these inputs being transacted in these sort of situations. Did I explain that relatively well, Sarang?
Yeah, I would say that's probably pretty good. And in terms of like the scalability of off-chain solutions, I mean, part of the problem that I've kind of always had philosophically with them is the idea that I guess so there's a lot less control about. Control is not the right word for that. I would say that on-chain solutions on proof of work are in general better understood from an attack perspective and from a security perspective. And I guess I've always been in favor of the idea that keeping things on-chain, gives us the security and privacy guarantees that we at least can understand. I mean, but again, that's kind of from just a big, vague philosophical perspective. And I mean, personally, from my perspective, and this isn't necessarily the position of everyone who works in the research lab, I mean, I look toward things like graph-based non-chain solutions that are still technically on-chain or on-graph as kind of like my hope for, I guess, a more scalable future, besides a lot of other perhaps off-chain solutions. And they're not really ready for prime time yet. And there's a lot of projects out there making big, grandiose claims about graph structures that I don't think are really borne out in security proofs at this point. So I guess from a scalability perspective, I've always been much more in favor of that. because that still gives us well understood kind of attack surfaces and protections against those attack surfaces.
Okay.
Do you want to talk slightly about Spectre? I haven't heard a lot about that since the initial announcement that you guys were considering as a thing for a DAG-based scaling proposal.
Yeah, so I mean, saying we're considering it is more of like we consider everything until we have a good understanding of if it's going to work correctly or not. So Spectre is a consensus mechanism that uses a directed acyclic graph, which is a bigger generalization of a blockchain. And really what that introduces is the ability to have a block reference, not just the previous block, which gives you a nice chain and an easy consensus mechanism of the longest chain wins, to a more complex graph-based solution where it's no longer clear, who has the longest graph. It doesn't necessarily make sense anymore. So a block can reference many other blocks. And the goal is to have kind of good connectivity in the resulting graph structure. And the way it works, in Spectre at least, is that blocks themselves, pairs of blocks, end up voting using this complex voting mechanism that's bizarrely recursive on consistency and ordering of transactions. And it's much more complex, but the nice thing is there are good proofs of security for it. The downside is that the scalability of how you end up doing these voting mechanisms isn't quite where we want it to be yet. The nice thing is it's, the option would be there if we had a good graph consensus mechanism to do it in one of our scheduled network upgrades, because a blockchain is technically a DAG. It's just a very, very simple one. So a good voting consensus mechanism on a graph should reduce down to the chain case for older transactions, for example. And the idea being that you could increase your trend, basically decrease the block arrival time and increase what transactions you're able to do in a certain amount of time in a way that does give you good 51% security. So that's kind of the slightly vague version of it. And there's alternative methods. There's one called Phantom by the same authors who did Spectre. And I can't remember. I think they were out of, I want to say Princeton, but I think that's wrong. But anyway, it's the same cryptography research group that did Phantom. And Phantom uses a bit different solution that involves kind of different subgraph connectivity mechanisms. And it's a little bit different than Spectre. There's been proposals by them to kind of do a hybrid between Spectre and Phantom, but that's still not terribly well understood. But it does show us that there are graph-based solutions out there that aren't full of crap and that do have solid research and analysis behind them that still maintain a block structure, which is good. That's kind of what we want. That would eventually scale if we can get some of the algorithms working the way we want to.
Okay.
So I would say we've definitely not ruled it out, but the scalability is such that we can't just start deploying it yet.
Great. Thank you, Saram.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Let's just do a quick check. Okay, so for the sake of time, I know there's another meeting people want to have right after this. So for the sake of time, I think we're going to wrap this up. So thank you, everyone who joined us in the coffee chat on YouTube. I hope that this is enjoyable for you to watch. We had a large number of people join us today. I'm sorry that we had some issues at the beginning with some of the recording. Unfortunately, Jitsi is not working, so it looks like we need to consider making our own self-hosted version of it. I'm literally taking a screen capture of this on my computer and then re-uploading it, so you can see why it's not the best. But I hope it still worked out for everyone. What we do is we make everything work. It's still better than the first time, the first meeting, and we had a lot of people here, so I'm so glad that we had it. Does anyone else want to have some final closing remarks? Okay, well, if that's the case, thank you everyone for joining us. I really appreciate that everyone here made the time to speak with us. I hope to speak with you all next month. And again, thanks to everyone for joining us in this chat. So, see you later.